In a quiet, unassuming town surrounded by dense forests and winding roads, Sarah Thompson stood out like a beacon of determination in a sea of conformity. The town was infamous for its rowdy biker gangs who roared through the streets on their thunderous motorcycles, leaving chaos in their wake. But Sarah wasn't fazed by their loud engines or intimidating presence. She had seen far worse during her time as a military K-9 handler, where she trained alongside some of the most disciplined dogs in the world. Now back in civilian life, Sarah worked as a private security consultant, offering her expertise to local businesses that needed protection from theft or vandalism. Her loyal companions were two highly trained German shepherds, Rex and Luna. These weren't ordinary pets. They were battle-tested veterans with razor-sharp instincts and unparalleled obedience. Together, the trio formed an unbeatable team, patrolling areas at night to ensure safety and order. Despite her impressive credentials and undeniable skill, Sarah often found herself facing skepticism. Some people simply couldn't wrap their heads around the idea of a woman commanding such powerful animals. Whispers followed her wherever she went. "She's too small," one person muttered. "How can she handle those big dogs?" Another sneered. Even though Sarah ignored these comments, they stung more than she cared to admit. Still, she pressed on, knowing that action spoke louder than words. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, Sarah decided to patrol near a notorious biker bar located on the outskirts of the area. It was a place where troublemakers gathered, drinking late into the night and causing disturbances. Though it wasn't part of her usual route, recent reports of vandalism nearby had caught her attention. With Rex and Luna trotting confidently beside her, she approached the dimly lit parking lot cautiously. The scene before her was chaotic, yet strangely mesmerizing. Dozens of motorcycles lined the cracked asphalt, their chrome gleaming under flickering streetlights. Groups of bikers lounged outside, laughing loudly and sharing stories over bottles of beer. Their leather jackets bore patches adorned with skulls, flames, and menacing slogans, a clear warning to outsiders. As Sarah walked past, her presence didn't go unnoticed. A few heads turned, curious about the lone figure accompanied by two imposing dogs. At first, there was silence, broken only by the distant hum of crickets and the occasional clink of glass. Then came the murmurs. "What's this chick doing here?" One voice growled. Another chimed in. "Yeah, look at her little guard dogs." Laughter erupted from the group, echoing through the otherwise peaceful night. Sarah clenched her jaw but kept walking, refusing to let their mockery rattle her. She knew better than to engage recklessly, especially when outnumbered. Instead, she focused on scanning the area, making sure everything seemed secure. But deep down, Sarah felt a spark of irritation ignite within her. These men thought they could intimidate her with their size and numbers. They clearly didn't know who or what they were dealing with. Rex and Luna sensed her tension, their ears perking up as they glanced at her for cues. For now, she signaled them to stay calm, but the situation was far from over. Little did the bikers know, they were about to learn a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The bikers, emboldened by their numbers and fueled by bravado, began to close in around Sarah. Their leader, Jake Iron Fist Malone, stepped forward with a smirk etched across his face. Jake was a towering figure, his muscular frame accentuated by the leather jacket adorned with patches that screamed defiance. His reputation for being ruthless and unyielding preceded him, but tonight, he seemed more interested in entertainment than trouble. And Sarah, standing there calmly with her two dogs, had become the unwilling star of his show. "Well, well," Jake drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "What do we have here?" "A little lady playing soldier." He glanced at Rex and Luna, who stood silently beside Sarah, their eyes sharp and focused. The dogs didn't bark or growl. They didn't need to. Their presence alone commanded respect, but Jake wasn't ready to acknowledge that yet. Instead, he chuckled, turning to his friends. "Look at these puppies. Think they're supposed to scare us?" His words were met with laughter from the group. One of the bikers leaned forward, pointing at Rex. "Yeah, maybe they can fetch our beers for us." Another chimed in, "Or roll over for treats." The jeers grew louder, each insult slicing through the cool night air like a knife. But Sarah didn't flinch. She kept her gaze steady, her posture unwavering. Her calm demeanor only seemed to infuriate Jake further. "Come on, sweetheart," Jake said, taking another step closer. "Why don't you tell your mutts to do a trick? Show us what they've got." He folded his arms across his chest, clearly enjoying himself. To him, this was all just harmless fun, a chance to assert dominance over someone he saw as weaker. What he failed to realize was that Sarah wasn't there to entertain him. She was there to do her job, and nothing, not even his taunts, would distract her from it. Sarah finally spoke, her voice firm and measured. "I'm not here to put on a show for you," she said, meeting Jake's gaze without hesitation, "and I'd advise you to back off before things escalate." There was no anger in her tone, only a quiet authority that made some of the bikers exchange uneasy glances. But Jake wasn't one to back down easily. In fact, her warning only seemed to amuse him more. "Oh, come on," he replied, feigning innocence. "We're just having a little fun. Don't be so serious." He motioned to one of his buddies, who promptly grabbed an empty beer bottle from the ground. With a grin, the man hurled it toward Rex and Luna, not hard enough to hit them, but close enough to make a point. The glass shattered against the pavement mere inches away from the dogs, sending shards skittering across the asphalt. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The laughter died down as everyone waited to see how Sarah would react. Would she yell, cry, walk away? None of those options seemed likely given her composed demeanor, but the tension hung heavy in the air. Rex and Luna remained still, their bodies coiled like springs, ready to act at Sarah's command. Even in the dim light, their piercing eyes glowed with intelligence and purpose. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly expecting some kind of reaction. When none came, he shrugged and turned back to his crew. "See, told you she's all talk," he said, smirking. But deep down, something about the situation unsettled him. Most people would have crumbled under the pressure by now, but Sarah hadn't even blinked. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. And though Jake couldn't quite put his finger on it, he knew they were dealing with someone different tonight. Unbeknownst to the bikers, Sarah's patience was wearing thin. While she understood that engaging emotionally would only escalate the situation, she also recognized that ignoring their behavior entirely wasn't an option. These men needed to understand the boundaries they were crossing. More importantly, they needed to learn that underestimating her, and her dogs, was a mistake they'd regret. As the seconds ticked by, Sarah tightened her grip on Rex's leash ever so slightly, signaling to her loyal companions that the game was about to change. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake and his gang continued to snicker among themselves, their confidence bolstered by Sarah's apparent lack of reaction. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Rex and Luna, sensing their handler's subtle cues, began to shift their stances ever so slightly. Their muscles tensed, their ears perked up even higher, and their eyes locked onto the bikers with an intensity that made some of them instinctively take a step back. Jake, however, remained oblivious, or perhaps too stubborn, to notice the change. He swaggered closer to Sarah, trying to assert his dominance one last time. "You know what," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "If you wanted protection, you should have brought something bigger than those two furballs." His laughter echoed through the parking lot, but it was hollow now, tinged with unease. The other bikers exchanged nervous glances, unsure why they suddenly felt like prey being watched by predators. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, her mind racing through the options before her. She could walk away, avoiding confrontation altogether, but doing so would only embolden these men further. They wouldn't stop at mocking her. They'd mock anyone else who dared stand up to them. No, this wasn't just about her pride anymore. It was about teaching them a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. And besides, Rex and Luna were more than capable of handling whatever came next. With quiet determination, Sarah gave a nearly imperceptible signal, a slight nod of her head, a barely audible click of her tongue. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than a casual movement. But for Rex and Luna, it was all they needed. In an instant, their demeanor transformed. Gone was the calm patience they had displayed moments earlier. In its place was the raw, focused energy of animals trained for combat. Their hackles rose slightly, and low growls rumbled deep in their throats, sending shivers down the spines of the closest bikers. Jake blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. "Whoa, hold on," he exclaimed, raising his hands defensively as Rex stepped forward. The dog didn't lunge or bark. He simply moved with calculated precision, his teeth bared just enough to remind everyone of what he was capable of. The sight was enough to make Jake stumble backward, tripping over his own feet in his haste to create distance between himself and the animal. But Sarah wasn't done yet. With another soft command, she signaled Luna to circle around the group. The sleek German shepherd moved like liquid shadow, her movements fluid and deliberate. Within seconds, she had positioned herself behind the bikers, cutting off any chance of escape. Now, the men found themselves surrounded, not by walls or weapons, but by two highly trained dogs whose loyalty to their handler was absolute. The realization dawned on them slowly, accompanied by a growing sense of dread. All right," one of the bikers shouted, his voice trembling. "We were just joking around, okay? No harm meant." He looked at Jake, silently pleading for guidance, but even the self-proclaimed leader seemed at a loss for words. For the first time that night, his bravado faltered. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly as he tried to regain control of the situation. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I warned you to back off," she reminded them, her gaze steady. "This is your last chance. Leave now, and we'll call it even." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. There was no anger in her tone, no desire for revenge. Just a clear message that further provocation would not end well for them. For a moment, nobody moved. The bikers stood frozen, weighing their options. On one side, they had their pride, their need to save face in front of their peers. On the other, they faced two dogs whose mere presence radiated power and discipline. It was a battle they couldn't win, no matter how tough they pretended to be. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to shuffle backward, putting as much space between themselves and Sarah's team as possible. As they retreated, Sarah allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She hadn't needed to raise her voice or resort to violence. Rex and Luna had done the talking for her, proving once again that true strength lies not in aggression, but in preparation, respect, and unwavering resolve. The bikers might have come looking for entertainment, but they were leaving with a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The scene in the parking lot had shifted dramatically. What had started as a display of bravado from the bikers had turned into something far more serious. The men, once so confident and loud, now looked uneasy, their earlier mockery replaced by wide eyes and nervous glances. Rex and Luna stood like guardians, their presence commanding respect without uttering a single bark. Sarah, calm and composed, watched as the bikers hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Jake, still trying to salvage his shattered confidence, attempted to play it cool. All right," he muttered, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a wheeze. "You've got some well-trained dogs here. We get it." But his words lacked conviction. His gaze darted between Rex and Luna, clearly calculating whether he could regain control of the situation. He straightened his posture, puffing out his chest in a feeble attempt to appear dominant again. "But let's not get carried away, Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gave another subtle command, a soft whistle this time. At the sound, Rex sprang into action. With lightning speed and precision, he lunged forward, not toward Jake, but toward one of the bikers standing closest to him. Before anyone could react, Rex grabbed the man's leather jacket with his teeth, tugging it off his shoulders in one swift motion. The biker stumbled backward, arms flailing as he tried to keep his balance. Within seconds, the jacket was on the ground, clutched firmly in Rex's jaws. The entire group fell silent, their mouths agape. For a moment, all that could be heard was the faint rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Then, slowly, murmurs of disbelief began to ripple through the crowd. "Did you see that?" one of them whispered. "That dog just stripped him like it was nothing." Another biker shook his head, muttering, "I've never seen anything like it." Even Jake, who had been so quick to mock Sarah earlier, looked genuinely stunned. He stared at Rex, his jaw slack, as if trying to process what had just happened. The dog hadn't growled, snarled, or shown any signs of aggression beyond the necessary action. It was as if Rex had performed a perfectly choreographed move, calculated, efficient, and utterly flawless. And the message was clear. These dogs weren't here to play games. Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice steady and measured. "Still think they're just furballs?" she asked, her tone laced with quiet authority. She gestured toward Rex, who stood proudly beside her, the leather jacket still clamped gently in his mouth. "This is what happens when you underestimate them, or me." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. One of them, the owner of the jacket, reached tentatively for it, only to stop when Rex let out a low warning growl. The man froze, his hand hovering midair before he awkwardly pulled it back. "Ugh, can I have that back?" he asked sheepishly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded slightly, signaling Rex to release the jacket. The dog obeyed instantly, dropping it neatly onto the ground without damaging it. The biker hesitated for a moment before bending down to pick it up, his movements cautious and deliberate. As soon as he had retrieved it, he retreated quickly, putting as much distance between himself and the dogs as possible. The rest of the group followed suit, taking slow, hesitant steps backward. They were no longer laughing or jeering. Instead, they wore expressions of awe and apprehension. Jake, however, wasn't ready to concede defeat entirely. He cleared his throat, attempting to summon some semblance of dignity. "Okay, fine," he said, his voice gruff. "Your dogs are impressive. We'll give you that." But Sarah wasn't interested in empty compliments. She crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze unwavering. "It's not about impressing anyone," she replied. "It's about respect. You came at me thinking I wouldn't stand my ground. Now you know better." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The bikers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Some shuffled their feet, while others glanced nervously at their motorcycles, clearly eager to leave. Yet none of them dared to make a move until Sarah gave them permission. They had underestimated her, and now they were paying the price for it. As the tension eased slightly, Sarah signaled to Rex and Luna to stand down. The dogs relaxed their stances, but remained alert, their eyes still locked on the bikers. It was a reminder that despite the temporary truce, they were more than capable of resuming their defensive positions if needed. The message was clear. Sarah and her team were not to be trifled with. For the first time that night, the bikers seemed genuinely humbled. Their laughter had faded, replaced by a newfound understanding of the power and discipline embodied by SAR. With the bikers now visibly shaken, Sarah decided it was time to drive her point home. If they thought Rex's display of skill was impressive, they hadn't seen anything yet. She knew that actions spoke louder than words, and nothing would teach these men respect quite like witnessing the full extent of what her dogs were capable of. Without saying a word, she gave a series of sharp, precise commands, gestures and whistles so subtle that only Rex and Luna could interpret them. The two German shepherds sprang into action immediately, their movements fluid and synchronized. First, Rex darted forward in a zigzag pattern, demonstrating his agility as he weaved between parked motorcycles with ease. His speed was breathtaking, each stride calculated and deliberate. Luna followed suit, circling around the opposite side of the lot, her sleek body gliding effortlessly over obstacles. Together, they created a perimeter, cutting off any chance for the bikers to flee while showcasing their unmatched coordination. Jake and his gang watched in stunned silence, their earlier arrogance replaced by awe. One of the bikers whispered hoarsely, "How are they doing that? It's like they're reading her mind." Another nodded slowly, his eyes wide. "I've never seen dogs move like that before." But Sarah wasn't finished. With another command, she signaled for Rex and Luna to perform a mock takedown. A discarded helmet lying on the ground became the target. In unison, the dogs lunged toward it, pinning it down with their paws and teeth, not aggressively, but with enough force to make it clear they could immobilize an opponent if needed. The precision of their movements left no room for doubt. These animals weren't just trained, they were elite. Sarah then instructed them to retrieve a stick she had casually tossed into the shadows. Within seconds, Rex returned with it, holding it gently in his mouth without damaging it. Luna followed close behind, carrying a second object, a small rock, that Sarah pointed out moments later. The demonstration was flawless, proving not only their obedience, but also their ability to adapt to unpredictable situations. As the dogs completed each task, the bikers' expressions shifted from disbelief to admiration. Even Jake, who had been the most vocal in mocking Sarah earlier, looked genuinely impressed. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head slowly. "Okay," he admitted grudgingly. "You weren't kidding when you said your dogs were trained." Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't about showing off," she said, meeting Jake's gaze. "It's about understanding what true strength looks like. These dogs aren't dangerous because they're mean. They're dangerous because they're disciplined. They don't act out of anger or fear. They follow orders, and they protect what matters." She paused, letting her words sink in. "That's something worth respecting." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado completely gone. One of them muttered under his breath, "We really messed up tonight, didn't we?" Another nodded, adding, "Yeah, she's got a point. Those dogs could have taken us down in seconds if they wanted to." Jake stepped forward hesitantly, his usual swagger replaced by humility. He cleared his throat, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Look," he began, scratching the back of his neck. We didn't mean any harm. We were just messing around, you know. But we see now that we crossed a line." He glanced at Rex and Luna, then back at Sarah. "We're sorry. Really." Sarah studied him for a moment, weighing his sincerity. Finally, she nodded slightly, accepting his apology. "Just remember this next time you decide to judge someone based on appearances," she said. "Respect goes both ways." The tension in the air began to dissipate as the bikers collectively exhaled, relieved that the confrontation hadn't escalated further. Some even offered tentative smiles, grateful that Sarah had chosen to teach them a lesson rather than retaliate harshly. As they started to disperse, heading back toward their bikes, Jake lingered for a moment longer. "Hey," he called out, turning back to Sarah. "You ever need backup, or, I dunno, someone to keep troublemakers away, you let us know, all right?" It was a clumsy attempt at making amends, but his tone was sincere. Sarah smiled faintly, nodding once more. "I'll keep that in mind," she replied, though she doubted she'd ever take him up on the offer. Still, the gesture meant something. It showed that her lesson had hit its mark. As the sound of revving engines filled the night air, Sarah stood tall, flanked by Rex and Luna, knowing she had earned not just their respect, but also a renewed sense of pride in the bond she shared with her loyal companions. The encounter outside the biker bar didn't end with apologies alone. Jake, still trying to salvage some shred of dignity, made an unexpected gesture. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier bravado. "How about we make things right? Let us buy you a drink, or a 3. He gestured toward the bar behind him, where neon lights flickered against the darkened windows. It was a clumsy attempt at peacekeeping, but there was sincerity in his tone. Sarah shook her head firmly, though not unkindly. "No thanks," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm not here for drinks or apologies. I'm here to do my job. What happened tonight doesn't change that." Her words carried weight, and Jake nodded slowly, accepting her response without argument. The rest of the bikers stood silently, watching as Sarah signaled Rex and Luna to move back into their patrol stance. She wasn't interested in lingering or gloating. She had proven her point, and that was enough. But Jake wasn't ready to let the moment slip away entirely. Before turning to leave, he extended his hand toward her, his palm open in a gesture of goodwill. "Listen," he said, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "You're right about everything you said. We messed up, plain and simple. But I promise you this. We'll spread the word. No one's gonna disrespect you or your dogs again. Not on my watch." For a brief second, Sarah hesitated. She studied his outstretched hand carefully, weighing his sincerity. Finally, she reached out and shook it, her grip firm but not aggressive. "Good," she said simply, holding his gaze. "Remember what you've learned tonight. Respect isn't given, it's earned." As the bikers mounted their motorcycles and roared off into the night, Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, yes, but also relief. The confrontation could have easily spiraled out of control, but instead it had become an opportunity for them to learn and for her to reinforce the values she held dear: discipline, respect, and resilience. Over the next few days, Sarah noticed a shift in how people treated her around town. Word of the incident spread quickly, fueled by whispers from the bikers themselves. Jake kept his promise, telling anyone who would listen about the woman with the 2 extraordinary dogs who had turned his crew's mockery into admiration. "She's not someone you want to mess with," he told one group at the bar. "And neither are those dogs. Trust me, I know." Local business owners began approaching Sarah more frequently, asking if she'd consider expanding her services. Some wanted her to patrol their properties regularly, while others sought advice on handling security threats. Even the police department reached out, impressed by her ability to de-escalate such a volatile situation. They invited her to assist during high-risk operations that required canine support, an offer she accepted after careful consideration. Her growing reputation brought new challenges, too. Strangers approached her on the street, curious about Rex and Luna. Children begged their parents to let them pet the dogs, unaware of the years of training that made them both gentle companions and formidable protectors. Sarah handled the attention graciously, always happy to share stories about her work, but she never lost sight of why she did it. For her, this wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about doing what was right, even when it meant standing alone. One evening, as she walked through the quiet streets with Rex and Luna trotting faithfully beside her, Sarah reflected on how far she'd come since leaving the military. Back then, she'd often doubted whether civilian life would ever feel fulfilling. Would people understand the bond she shared with her dogs? Would they see the value in what she did? Those doubts had faded now, replaced by a deep sense of purpose. Rex paused suddenly, his ears perking up as he scanned the area. Luna mirrored his movements, her body tense and alert. Sarah followed their gaze, spotting a shadowy figure lurking near a storefront down the block. Without hesitation, she moved closer, her presence commanding authority. The figure froze, then bolted before she could get a good look. Rex and Luna stayed close, their protective instincts unwavering. As she continued her patrol, Sarah smiled faintly. Life in this small town might be unpredictable, but one thing was certain: she and her dogs were making a difference. And that was all that mattered. Weeks turned into months, and Sarah's life in the small town transformed in ways she hadn't anticipated. The incident with the bikers became something of a legend, passed around in hushed tones at local diners, gas stations, and even town council meetings. People who had once dismissed her as just another security handler now greeted her with nods of respect. Parents pointed her out to their children, saying, "See that woman? She's the one with the amazing dogs who stood up to those bikers." It was strange, Sarah thought, how quickly perceptions could shift. Her days grew busier as demand for her services skyrocketed. Store owners begged her to patrol their businesses after hours, knowing her presence, and Rex and Lunas would deter troublemakers. Even residents who lived on the outskirts of town began hiring her to check on their properties when they were away. Word of her reputation spread beyond the town limits, drawing inquiries from neighboring communities. Some asked if she offered training sessions for personal protection dogs. Others wanted advice on how to handle difficult situations involving large groups or unruly individuals. Sarah handled each request thoughtfully, always prioritizing quality over quantity. The local police department also leaned on her expertise more frequently. Officers admired not only her skill, but also her calm demeanor under pressure. They often called her in to assist during high-risk operations, such as drug busts or manhunts, where Rex and Luna's tracking abilities proved invaluable. One particularly memorable operation involved locating a fugitive hiding in dense woods. While officers struggled to navigate the terrain, Rex picked up the scent within minutes, leading them straight to the suspect without incident. Afterward, the chief personally thanked Sarah, calling her team an asset we can't afford to lose. Despite the growing recognition, Sarah remained grounded. She knew better than anyone that fame was fleeting, and she didn't want accolades to distract from her mission, keeping people safe. Still, it was hard not to feel a sense of pride when strangers approached her with gratitude. A shopkeeper whose store had been targeted by vandals told her, "Ever since you started patrolling here, I haven't had a single problem. Thank you for giving me peace of mind." Another resident admitted, "I used to be scared walking home late at night, but seeing you and your dogs makes me feel safer." Rex and Luna thrived under the increased workload, their energy seemingly boundless. They loved being active, whether it was sniffing out potential threats, practicing drills, or simply trotting alongside Sarah as she made her rounds. Their bond with her deepened every day, built on years of trust, training, and mutual understanding. To outsiders, they appeared almost supernatural in their abilities, but Sarah knew their success stemmed from countless hours of dedication and patience. One evening, as Sarah sat on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she reflected on how much had changed since that fateful night outside the biker bar. What had started as an act of mockery had turned into a defining moment, not just for her, but for the entire community. The bikers, true to Jake's word, had spread the story far and wide, ensuring no one underestimated her again. In fact, some of them occasionally waved at her when passing by, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson they'd learned. As Rex rested his head on her lap and Luna curled up at her feet, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of contentment. Life wasn't perfect. There were still long nights, unpredictable challenges, and moments of doubt, but she wouldn't trade it for anything. Together, she and her dogs had carved out a place where respect ruled over fear, where strength came not from aggression, but from discipline and unity. And though the road ahead might hold new obstacles, she faced it with confidence, knowing she had two loyal companions by her side. The town slept peacefully that night, its streets quiet and secure. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine roared briefly before fading into silence. Sarah smiled, knowing the message had been received loud and clear. This was her territory now, and no one would disrupt it without facing the consequences. Months had passed since the night Sarah stood her ground against the bikers, but its impact lingered like a ripple in a pond, touching every corner of her life and the community around her. The small town, once known for its rowdy biker gangs and late-night disturbances, had undergone a quiet transformation. Crime rates dropped noticeably, and businesses that had struggled with vandalism or theft reported fewer incidents. People credited Sarah, and of course Rex and Mia, for this newfound sense of safety. Though she never sought recognition, it was clear that her presence had become a cornerstone of security in the area. Late one evening, As Sarah walked through the deserted streets with her dogs by her side, she found herself reflecting on how far they'd come together. The cool breeze carried the faint scent of pine from the nearby woods, and the only sounds were the rhythmic clicks of her boots against the pavement and the soft padding of Rex and Luna's paws. It was moments like these, quiet, peaceful, and uneventful, that reminded her why she did what she did. Every confrontation avoided, every threat neutralized before it escalated, meant another night where families could sleep soundly and shopkeepers could leave their stores without worry. Her thoughts drifted back to the bikers. Jake and his crew hadn't caused any trouble since that fateful encounter, and surprisingly, they occasionally crossed paths in town. At first, their interactions were awkward. A nod here, a mumbled greeting there. But over time, something unexpected developed: mutual respect. One day, while patrolling near the outskirts of town, Sarah spotted Jake leaning against his motorcycle outside a mechanic's garage. When he saw her approach, he straightened up and tipped an imaginary hat. "Evenin', Sarah," he said, his tone respectful. "Rex and Luna looking good as always." She returned the nod, smiling faintly. "Thanks, Jake. You staying out of trouble." He chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. Yeah. Learned my lesson, didn't I?" His gaze shifted to the dogs, who watched him calmly. "Still can't believe those two took me down a peg or two. Guess I needed it, though." Sarah didn't respond immediately, letting his words hang in the air. Finally, she said, "It's not about taking anyone down. It's about learning when to step back and show respect. Looks like you're doing all right." With that, she continued on her way, leaving Jake standing there, shaking his head with a grin. As the seasons changed, so did Sarah's role in the community. She became more than just a security handler. She was a symbol of resilience and integrity. Parents invited her to speak at schools, eager for their children to hear her stories about teamwork, discipline, and perseverance. Local newspapers featured profiles on her, highlighting her journey from military K-9 handler to civilian protector. Yet despite the attention, Sarah remained humble, deflecting praise onto Rex and Luna whenever possible. "They're the real heroes," she often said. "Without them, none of this would be possible." One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled in the wind, Sarah decided to take Rex and Luna to a secluded park for some downtime. They deserved it after months of relentless work. As the dogs bounded freely across the open field, chasing each other with joyful abandon, Sarah sat on a bench and watched them, feeling a deep swell of gratitude. These animals weren't just tools of her trade. They were family. Together, they had faced challenges, overcome prejudice, and earned the trust of an entire town. Looking back, Sarah realized that the night with the bikers wasn't just a turning point for the men who mocked her. It was a defining moment for herself, too. It reaffirmed her belief in the power of preparation, patience, and unity. She had proven not only to others, but also to herself that true strength came not from aggression or intimidation, but from inner resolve and unwavering loyalty. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah called Rex and Luna back to her side. They trotted over eagerly, their tails wagging, ready for whatever lay ahead. Together, they walked home under the fading light, three figures united by purpose and bound by trust. In a world full of uncertainty, they had carved out a legacy of strength, grace, and unshakable determination, a testament to the idea that even in the face of doubt, respect could always triumph. And as long as Sarah and her dogs stood together, the town would remain safe, one patrol at a time.